Hey, what's up, guys? It's Art Book Addiction here, and we're here with a new artist journey video. So today we're going to be talking about critique, or um, why it's important, how to take it, uh, you know, if it's good critique, if it's bad critique, all that kind of stuff, right? Critique is the best way to describe it is a way to sharpen your work, right? So if your artwork is a big, nice raw piece of like iron or something, critique is the whetstone in which you will sharpen your blade, right? Making it better, making it stronger, right? And making it sharper, right? So that's what we'll be talking about today, right? But before we start the video, please hit that like, hit that subscribe, check out my prints and Patreon if you want to support the channel. And with that, let's get into this. So, critique. I want you guys to understand that in the artist journey, critique is a vital part of it, okay? Because you don't really know how you're supposed to get better, right? And critique is something that I'm sure a lot of artists it's gonna hurt, but you want it, okay? It's a painful thing, but it's something that could really improve your work, right? And so critique, is just the simple act of like saying like, hey, I see this piece, but I think it could be better with option A, option B, whatever, whatever suggestion they have, right? And critiquing is usually happening in a more educational environment, right? So I want you guys to understand that critique is, in most cases, not always, it is it doesn't come from an emotional place, right? Critique is supposed to be technical, right? And that's how you should view it, right? Critique is technical. Like, for example, like, hey, let's say you have like a portrait of a face, right? And perhaps the lighting on the cheek is too harsh, right? And so like it could be smoothed out, right? Let's say if the transition from like here on my face to here, right? And it's like super harsh, right? Someone might tell you like, hey, the transition here is very harsh, so maybe you should smooth it out, right? And your reaction to that, right, tells a lot about who you are as an artist, right? I would say that the best artists, they listen, okay? They listen and they equate, right? And they evaluate the validity of what the person is saying, right? To take offense, to take it personally, right, shows a lot of inexperience, right? And that's you're young, right? If you're a young artist, you're gonna take critique pretty badly, right? Because they're like, well, you put in all this effort, and now they're saying something that isn't just praise, right? They're saying something that is like that almost goes against your work, right? Which you put a lot of work into, a lot of emotion, right? There's an attachment there, right? And it's like someone calling your child like, hey, dude, like he could have played better at this one thing, you know what I mean? Like, oh, like he's playing baseball, he could have hit the ball even faster, dude, if you wanted to, right? But he didn't, and so it's like, you want to instantly defend, right? And so with that, there comes like a kind of particular etiquette, right? And the best way to describe it is have you ever seen like one of those cooking shows, right, with like Gordon Ramsay or something, right, where someone, they'll like Gordon will bash someone's work, or say like he'll give critique, right, in a very like sometimes very harsh way, right? Like he's Gordon Ramsay, you know what I mean? And then they're like yes chef, yes chef. It's like the reason they're doing that, right, is because they recognize that he is someone who is trying to help them, right? And how someone helps you can be harsh or hard, right? Or like it could be seen as mean, you know what I mean? But if you know that they're trying to help you, then you should understand that like that could just have to do with their personality, right? Or maybe they want to deliver something in a way that makes you realize like the level of mistake that you've made, right? And at the end of the day, critiques are there to make you better, right? They're not there to make you worse. They're not there to hurt you, right? Some people may be trying to hurt you, right? But that may not, that may still be a valid critique, right? You know, like, but what I'm trying to say is you shouldn't put too much emotional stock into critiques, right? What you should have is try to get as much critique as possible, right? And understand that like you're like, okay, well, here's this critique, right? Does it really apply to my piece? You know, because sometimes people make critique or that like is like completely unnecessary, and like, you know, like hey, what if you added this element that's like, hey, that would require like restructuring the entire drawing. There's no point in that, right? I would consider that like more of a bad critique, you know what I mean? However, if there's something like, like there's something that what usually happens is there's those miracle critiques where they say like, hey, you know, what if you add this little thing right here and that would help make the composition better, right? And it's like oh wow, like, and you're like you see like, oh wow, that's actually a good idea, right? And that's like the beauty of critique, right? Like it's the when something surprises you and you're like, I never thought that, right? And that's when the feedback of other artists can really help you, right? When you're like, because you're just one mind, right? But when other minds come in to help, like, you know, it's almost like, you know, cutting away the bad parts or adding good parts and stuff like that, right? And that's just the way it is. Like, you have to see critique as a means of making you better and putting other minds to it, right? Like, it's your piece, right? And you want to make it better, right? And other people can add to that, right? And help make it even better than that, right? But it depends on like how finished your work is, right? Depends on like, you know, like if you're in the mid stage or if you're in the final stages and you're basically fully rendered, you're like, well, I can't do that now, right? So it just depends on where you're at and where you are in the process, and the amount of work it would require to implement such a critique, right? But in most critiques, it's just like, hey, I noticed this mistake, you should fix it, right? Because if they notice, then other people are going to notice, right? Like, you know, if another student notices, then a teacher will most definitely notice, right? Because they have that eye, right? And you should be developing that eye yourself, right? So getting critique is very important, but also giving critique is also very important, because it also increases your ability to critique your own work, right? Because, like, you know, at a certain point, when you're out of an academic background, you know what I mean, you're gonna be by yourself, right? And the only person to really critique your work is yourself, you know what I mean? Or maybe you could show it to other people, but, like, you know, maybe they don't want to critique it, right? And so in like I said, in an academic environment, this is the place where you need to learn to critique, you need to learn to take critique, right? And you need to understand that critique is not like an inherently evil thing, right? It's just there to make you better, right? And, you know, like, some people, like I said, the critique is attached to the person, right? And that is very, like, you can almost not remove that, right? Because like if someone who's really good critiques you, right, you're more willing to listen to them, right? Like, that's why you have teachers, right? Because they're way above your skill level, right? And so, like, you're gonna listen to them, you're gonna take the critique more seriously, right? But then there's other people who are maybe on the same level as you, right, or maybe less than you, right, and then you're gonna probably take the people who are equal to you more seriously, but the people less than you not so seriously, right? But there are critiques on, like, you know, the objective standpoint, because sometimes someone who is less experienced can say something that is actually like very helpful to your piece, right? And people who are above you who may say something that is just like, you know, it's like, okay, that's cool and that's helpful, but not really, you know what I mean? That's just like, it's just theoretical stuff, you know what I mean? Just like, oh, make the lighting better, right? That's very vague. It's like, no, you gotta like, someone who says like, hey dude, fix the lighting on the face, and like, that's a portrait. It's like, well, yeah, but some people will be like, hey, this cheek needs to be softer, right? The highlight on the forehead needs to be sharper, right? This and that, you know what I mean? But the whole point is that you should take it all kind of just like evenly, right? And then like I said, use it through a net, right? I mean, like, and your net should be your own critique, right? Your own knowledge and skill, right? Like, it says like, so like maybe like the cheek could be softer, right? And then like, and you're like, yes, I agree with that. The transition, way too sharp. I agree with that. I'm gonna take that critique, add it to the box, right? Someone says like, hey, there is like what if you added like a moon in the background? What if you added this, you know, like what if you added like the Titanic, you know, right? That's a critique where you're like, adding a Titanic is a cool idea, right? But that would require extreme amounts of work and would is unnecessary for my composition, right? So you take that critique and you put it in the trash, right? And then the whole point is you get a whole bunch of critique, a whole bunch of feedback, right? And you're like, okay, and then you're like, this one's good, this one's good, this one's bad, this one's good, this one's good, this one's bad, right? And you take all the good ones, right? And then you see what you can improve there, right? And then you see the validity of it, right? And then sometimes there's something that you put in the trash, but then you realize as you're working it, as you're making it better, you're like, hey, you know what, dude? I could, that one, that could work, you know what I mean? But like I said, it's for you to determine, right? And what I'd like to encourage is to try not to have any bias when it comes to the critique, right? The critique, like I said, should be, you know, in its best form, very technical, you know what I mean? Technical and like unemotional in a way, right? So the problem with that, okay, is that art is an emotional thing, right? Creation is an emotional thing. You put a lot of work, you put a lot of care, right, into your work, right? And so when someone says something bad, you know, like I said, there's the emotional reaction, right? But you need to stifle that, right? Like when Gordon Ramsay is yelling at his students, right? Some of them will take it personally, right? Others will not. And the best people don't take it personally. They're like, he's trying to make me better. He's delivering it in a certain way. Maybe I don't like that, but that's okay. Because what the information that he's delivering is pure, right? And that's the way you want it, right? Okay. So I want to talk about giving critique, right? So when you're in an academic environment, right? You know, you like, maybe you take things objectively, right, and like very like emotionlessly, you know what I mean? Which is good, right? Like, you know, it's supposed to be that kind of thing, right? But the thing is that other people will not take it so well, right? And so when in those cases, right, you want to employ strategy, right? And I would say that the best strategy, you know, this was taught by an instructor of mine, right, is the sandwich method, right? You say something that works, you say something that doesn't work, and you say something that works again, and just to kind of like wrap it all up, right? So let me give an example for you, right? Let's say like, hey, you know, the way you lit this forehead is working really good, right? However, I think your nose might, like the nostril might be a little too big, right? So you might want to pare that down a little bit, right? But the overall render is, I think, is working. I think is working, right? And so that is a clear example of the sandwich method, right? You say something nice, you say something that is the critique, right? And then you sandwich it up with something about the overall package, right? Which I think, works pretty well, right? However, like I said, some people, like, they'll take it bad no matter what, right? But I got, to be honest, the sandwich method is your best chance for them to eat the critique, right? Going overly hard, right? Like critiquing like every single like little thing, right? Like there's a tangent here. You need to fix the lighting here, and then you need to fix this, and then you fix that. And it's like that is a way for someone to push someone to not listen to their critique, right? Because then they're like, well, you just think the whole thing is wrong, right? And that's not what you want, right? You want them to listen to the critique. You want them to pay attention to what you're saying and respect the critique. You know what I mean? For what it is. And some people, they're not going to take it. They're just not going to take it. And you as an artist, like you shouldn't take offense to that. You know what I mean? You're like, hey, they didn't like it, whatever. You know what I mean? But like, delivery is very important. And you also want to be very, like, you want to be deadpan, right? You want to be as like this is, there's no emotion in this, right? Like there's no ill intent, there's nothing behind this, because people can read that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Right? And you don't want to be a nitpicker, right? You don't want to be like little this, little that. Like you want to do like, hey, what's the one thing that you think that they could change, that would make a big difference in their work, right? And I think that's the best way, because like, especially if you're in a classroom environment, there's gonna be other people who critique, right? Hopefully, right? And they're gonna be adding stuff too. Maybe they'll say the thing that you want to say, right? So you just gotta focus on that one critique that you're like, hey, what's gonna be the thing that I want to say, right? And then just stick with that, right? Because like I said, a lot of people, they're not gonna pay attention to the people who are just like, bagging them, dogging them, right? So there has to be that balance, right? So when you critique someone's work, just focus on one thing. You're like, hey, I like it, one thing, and then wrap it up. You know what I mean? That's the bread, the meat, the bread. Okay, right? So that's just a good way. That's just for me, a good method to deliver a critique. You know what I mean? Right? And I'm a scary person, right? I'm someone who is skilled, right? I'm technically pretty strong, right? So when I deliver critique, it can be very frightening for a lot of artists. You know what I mean? Who are like who are more meek, right? Or less well spoken, more introverted, right? So you need the sandwich method has worked for me, right? And I'm sure it'll work for you, right? So another thing is knowing when to critique, right? So the best way to know is if someone asks you, like, hey, what can I do to make this better, right? In most cases, when someone asks your opinion on something, they just want the overall, right? They're not asking for its critique, right? So like something that like is what I would consider not exactly bad etiquette, but like you don't want to misread the situation, right? Or like, let's say you have another artist, right, friend, and you're like, hey, I want to present this work to you, right? And I'm like, hey, what do you think about this, right? They're just like, in most cases, they're just asking for your overall opinion. You know what I mean, right? Some will ask for critique, right, and that's good, right? And then that's like the okay for you to critique, right? But if you don't get that okay, right, then just give your broad opinion. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I like, this is good, I like this, right? Or like, or you could be like, you're like, hey, it's working, like you basically have to say like that you like it, or maybe you don't like it, or like you're like I like it, but there's something about that it's not quite working, right? And that's not really a critique. That's just like I said, an all-encompassing kind of opinion, right? If they try to ask like, well, what do you mean by that? Then you could like kind of like explain, right? But you're still trying to avoid the critique space, right? So unless someone directly asks you like, hey, I'd like a critique, right? Then I would say to just avoid it, right? And just focus more on giving your opinion, right? Because that is more of what they want. You know what I mean? Like giving a critique at the wrong place at the wrong time can hurt a friendship, or it could lead to someone not wanting to show you their work, because you're more focused on critiquing than just giving them like an overall opinion, which is which is kind of what they want. It's like, because critique is very specific and opinion is very broad, right? And so maybe they want the broad thing, they don't want the specific thing, right? But these things are balanced, right? You got to know when, right? So a lot of times, right, when someone would show me something, like sometimes I would ask like, okay, do you want my opinion or do you want my critique, right? It's like you could immediately just like, hey, what do you want, right? Because the two things are very different, right? So yeah, critique is very, very important to your artwork. Critique will improve your work like immensely. It's the best way. Okay, it's the best way. It's the way for your teachers to tell you. It's the best way for your other artists to like get your work to get better, right? And you need to understand that there's like a kind of respect, right? Like for most artists, right, and for most teachers, right, I think that like especially in an academic environment, right, like going to art school, giving critique is like a sign of respect. You know what I mean? Right? Like giving no feedback, zero, right, is for me very disrespectful, right? Like let's say you're like in a room with a bunch of people, and like maybe like one or two people says something but everybody else says nothing, right? Like that's kind of like, I find that very disrespectful, right? And what I find respectful is when someone gives the feedback, right? Because they're like, it's like, well, they said nothing, then this must be the perfect piece, like ever. You know what I mean? It must be like the best thing on the planet, dude. Because like no one could say nothing wrong with it, right? And like I said, in an academic environment, I think people really pay attention to that. You know what I mean? If your piece is something that no one says anything to, like you feel bad, right? Whether they say something good or bad, like you want someone to say something to react to your piece. If this is a piece that garners no reaction, then like the artist only feels worse. You know what I mean? And so, because at that point they don't know what is the problem. They don't know if there even is a problem. Like, hey, is the work good? Is the work bad? Is there like something? You know what I mean? Like I don't know. Like you got to tell me, right? And so I would say, like, if your teacher is calling up on you to give critique, okay? And do it well. Learn to get better at it, right? Because, like I said, at a certain point, it's just going to be you and your work, right? And so you're going to need to be able to critique your own work, right? To make it better. And that's how you develop your own kind of like method of scrutinizing your own work, right? And the better you get at it, the better your work will become, right? Because you'll be able to scrutinize your work, you know what I mean? And like unbiasedly, right? And that's a skill, and you need to build it up, right? It doesn't start like well, I know everything. It's like, no, you need to build it up. You need to hear other people's perspective, you know what I mean? It's like, it's almost like a discussion, right? So you guys really need to value critique, okay? And like it's honestly, it's the best way, right, to get better and to get the feedback that you want, right, and to get the work to the spot where you want it. And like I said, you never know when someone's gonna say something and it's just gonna, you're totally right, dude. Like that I need to do that, or like they say like, hey, you should add this, and like I never would have thought of that. You know what I mean? Those are the best parts of critique. You know what I mean? So there's the good, there's the bad, and there's the miracle, right? So all these things considered, right? Imagine having none of that, right? And that's what giving no critique is, right? There is no discussion, there's no room for improvement, there's not like it's just nothing, just like an ether of like non-feedback, right? And you don't want to put that on somebody else, right? So you want to give respect, and you want to give the critique, right? Like I said, find the one thing, you know what I mean? So you don't do it overboard, right? So these things are gonna improve you as an artist, right? So even if it's a harsh critique, take it in stride, right? Like it's gonna hurt, but like be like, okay, I'm gonna take it. Are they right about what they're saying? And then implement it into your work to improve your work. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's the best mate. That's the best way. It's the best method. You know what I mean? If you're someone who doesn't take critique well, you know, if you're very like, when someone says something against your work, like you take it very harshly, right? Try not to, right? Try to take it more with level head. Take a very like logical approach, right? And that's how you'll get better, right? But yeah, I think we can end the video here, guys. Please, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like, hit that subscribe. Check out my prints and my Patreon if you want to support the channel. Ring that bell for notification. All that bullshit. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks a lot.